head straight up. But it's highly unusual for us to actually see one coming in from the west, which, maybe Chris Franklin, standing by, chief meteorologist, maybe you can give us some insight on that. How often do we see this happen?
Yeah, not as often. I mean, it's certainly not unusual, but yeah, we tend to see these coming at us from the southeast or east, or maybe from the due south. So this coming at us from the southwest is a little bit more unusual, but actually this is associated with the same wave that we had been tracking 2 weeks ago. This is the one that had been given a high chance of development in the latter part of August and early September, and it never did happen. It moved across the Caribbean. It never happened. Moved into the Yucatan. Still nothing. Got into the Bay of Campeche, southwestern Gulf. It interacted with the low that brought us the rainfall last week, and then we started to get that organization. But it is still interesting, and this is a pretty good example of the entire season. It is just not cooperating with what the models thought would be happening. The models thought we would already have a hurricane. The models thought we would see maybe not necessarily rapid intensification, but very quick intensification throughout the day today. What has been that factor? The dry air has really put a number on this and kept it fairly well capped. Now the pressure has steadily dropped, so if it is able to organize a bit more, we could see it kind of intensify very quickly, but that just has not yet happened. In fact, there was a large area of convection thunderstorms that were well removed, and now even more so removed. Actually, these are just south of the Louisiana coast that'll be moving our way during the course of the afternoon. Right now, though, you'll see those thunderstorms kind of blossom around that broad center, and then they fall apart. That's something else to note. While the center is here, notice, if you want to call it kind of an eye wall feature, it is enormous. This is not well concentrated around a tightly wound core. If that were to happen, we would likely start to see it kind of tap into that lower pressure and really start to quickly intensify, though that has not yet happened. And one of the big factors, and I talk about this every single season, is the dry air. Models just don't handle it very well. We've seen that with the seasonal forecast. Dry air on a large scale has really suppressed development, and within individual storms, it creates a nightmare for computer models that really struggle with the structure. Now, with that being said, the intensity has kind of been a little bit all over the place, although we have never seen this really going on a higher track in terms of the intensity. And in fact, a lot of the models that had at one time been indicating that rapid intensification, or kind of on the stronger end of a category 2, have been backing off. As I've been saying, this is not going to be an Ida. This is not a monster storm. With Ida, we could see that clear path to the Louisiana coastline for constant intensification right up to the point of landfall. Francine does not have that. In fact, it is a very hostile environment that it'll be moving into later tonight and into early tomorrow. So there is the chance, the Hurricane Center is mentioning that in their discussion, that it could briefly become a 2 right before landfall, before weakening almost immediately by the time it crosses the Louisiana coastline. I like using the center line because it does give you that idea of which way the Hurricane Center's track is trending. And for all day yesterday, that center line was to the west of Marsh Island. Then as we got into the early morning hours today, that model trend started to shift back east. Could it shift again? Very, very possible if the eye structure is able to maybe develop elsewhere. Again, what the computer models do with the forecast track is it is only forecasting the center point of the storm, not the entire storm itself. So this track with the center line and the cone, this is only forecasting that initial point, that center point of the storm, which at the moment is very large, very broad. If it's able to maybe organize a little bit more, we could see another adjustment in the track. And the way this storm has been going, I would venture to say we'll probably see not maybe dramatic changes, but certainly little wobbles one way or the other. Either way, we're looking at a little bit of a later landfall if you're just joining us this afternoon that we were talking about yesterday. Most yesterday afternoon and evening, we were looking at kind of a 1 p.m. or early afternoon landfall. Now it's looking to be more late afternoon into the early evening hours. It is going to be moving very fast. By wake-up time on Thursday, the storm is already almost to Jackson, Mississippi, and we're going to be on a dry drier side. So we will already start to see water pushing out of the lake, away from the coast, and drying conditions. And that dry air also will play a big role in how soon we will start to see our rainfall wrap up. And that may be as soon as late tomorrow night. With regards to the computer models, right now, they're basically right in the middle of what the hurricane models or the hurricane forecast, the Hurricane Center's track is indicating. We will see with later runs if they do kind of shift a little bit. And while there is a decent agreement with the models, there is still also a fairly decent spread with how close this is to making landfall. Normally, this close to making landfall, there's a bit more agreement with the models. So even the models are still kind of trying to figure out where that center is eventually going to settle before it crosses our coastline. And again, that has been a tricky process with the storm thus far. And notice the winds are at 65 miles an hour at the center, but a buoy that is not too far to the east, only reporting 22-mile-an-hour winds and gusting up to 30. So unless the wind field is able to increase in size between now and tomorrow evening, not going to see those hurricane force winds very far away from the center. Now, with that being said, as it does near the coastline with further intensification expected, we would likely start to see that wind field expand a bit. How far, how large that wind field is still yet to be determined. Our computer model here, kind of simulated satellite, does a fairly good job of indicating that drier air wrapping around. Not exactly in sync with what the Hurricane Center is thinking. The model thinking the storm is going to be a little bit more to the south of where the Hurricane Center is taking it. But note, it does kind of indicate that dry air really helping to erode away a lot of the rainfall. And I do think that what Peyton has been mentioning earlier, we're going to see kind of a thin band of some of the heaviest totals, and then away from that band, rainfall accumulations are not going to be nearly the detrimental amount for rainfall flooding. I don't think that is going to be a widespread issue. Here's a look at the two global models, the GFS. Pretty decent agreement. What's also interesting is that the GFS, notice where it keeps the heaviest of the rainfall, more on the western, right around the center and down to the south. Normally what we call the dirty side or the stronger side is the eastern side. If that dry air is able to kind of move all the way around the center of the storm, which it has been doing, it may keep a lot of the heavy rainfall only right at landfall and along the path of the center of the storm. That would not really allow for a wide area of some of those higher rainfall totals and more of a narrow band. Kind of the same thing being indicated by the Euro. A lot of that heavier rainfall is only going to be right around the center. And notice it kind of also takes into account that drier air. So it could be that some of the heavier totals are actually just to the west of the center of the storm as opposed to the east. Every storm structure is completely different. Normally, when you talk about the dirty side and a well-structured storm, those are your major hurricanes. This is probably going to be a little bit more of a sloppier system, not well organized, not exactly that symmetrical storm structure that you're more accustomed to seeing, as this is not, again, going to be a major hurricane. This is not going to be an Ida. So rainfall, I don't believe, is going to be a huge issue. One thing that we have to watch now for is the greater risk of some of those tropical storm force, maybe even hurricane force winds. Certainly more along the lines of the tropical storm force winds. So the chance of those winds sustained in excess of 40 miles an hour, then gusting to possibly near hurricane force, we are looking at now a higher likelihood of that across much of southeast Louisiana, including metro New Orleans, with that shift in the track of the storm. Now our model here, this is just the GFS. We're looking at winds sustained 30 plus miles an hour, looking a little bit more likely 40, but that could be, depending upon the size of the wind field, a little bit more closer to the center of the storm and not as widespread. But certainly a very windy day tomorrow, and we know it doesn't take much in terms of winds to start bringing down power lines and branches, so we can I think pretty safely say we're going to see some power outages during the day. The good news, though, is that, as Entergy's been mentioning, once the winds drop below 30 miles an hour, they can start sending crews out. And we should start to see improving conditions late Wednesday and really into the overnight hours of Thursday morning. As far as the rainfall totals, notice it's also indicating a little bit more of a band of 7 to 10 plus inches of rainfall. Widespread now, more of a 4 plus to 5 inches of rainfall. But I think that band of some of the heavier totals totals are going to be fairly narrow. It's just going to be a big question mark as to exactly where that line sets up. The other issue, as we've mentioned, has been the storm surge. With the storm a little bit closer to southeast Louisiana, some of those totals have come up. Still looks like the greatest totals will be in our southern facing coastline, Lower Lafourche, Lower Terrebonne, and that's where I think at the highest we're looking at kind of a 5 to 10. Hurricane Center, when they send out these type of numbers, they usually go with the worst case scenario. So this is about as high as it could get, and as Peyton was mentioning earlier, it's looking more and more likely we could get into that 8 to 10 foot range, especially from Terrebonne Bay westward. Barataria Bay probably more like 4 to 7 feet, and then most of areas east of the river would be more 3 to 5, but that water has already been piling into Lake Pontchartrain, so we know it does flood southern Tangipahoa Parish, St. Tammany Parish, as well as making its way into our river parishes before. Next couple of years, hopefully that won't be an issue with the Corps of Engineer project going on. Mentioning the environment, though, kind of surrounding the storm, note the dry air around the center of Francine and the very dry air across Texas and Louisiana. This and wind shear will really cause havoc unless this storm is able. I've been mentioning this yesterday. Today was kind of the make or break for the storm. We will see what its structure is able to do through the rest of this afternoon and evening, because as we get into early tomorrow morning, the wind shear and that dry air will really start to pose more of a factor in the structure of the storm. It will start pushing the storm tops off to the east and northeast. It'll start removing a lot of the heavier rainfall. It will start disrupting the core of the storm. So the window of opportunity is basically from now until probably about 4 a.m. tomorrow morning before it starts to get into that more hostile environment. Here's another look at that dry air wrapping around it. Again, this is going to be a big player in our rainfall for tomorrow. More of a thin band of some of those heavier totals as that dry air starts moving in. Notice this is 10 o'clock. We could already start to see a lot of those heavier rainfall rates starting to wind down. I'd mentioned on the satellite a moment ago with that large cluster of convection of thunderstorms, heavy rainfall that kind of became separated from Francine. Well, it's moving onshore now, so we are starting to see some of that moderate to heavy rainfall, kind of that tropical, steady, non-stop rain along the coastline, and this is all moving northward. So this is kind of the start of the rains from Francine starting to move onshore right now. A little bit closer in look at the rainfall. At the moment, most of this is manageable, but sometimes the radar doesn't depict the tropical rains as intense as they actually are. So these are probably at times fairly heavy storms that are rolling in along the coastline at the moment and will continue through the night. Around the metro area, though, we're fairly quiet. Mostly cloudy skies, temperatures at 79 degrees at the moment, and at least with the rain and clouds, it has kept our temperatures down, so always looking for that silver lining. This is going to be a very fast-moving storm. Throughout the day tomorrow, even in the early morning hours, many of us will still have a little bit of time if you need to run out. I wouldn't recommend it, but you'll still have some time before just the rest of the day Wednesday. You'll want to hang inside, wait until late Wednesday night, early Thursday morning. Conditions will already be improving.